Good.
Do we have a guest with us above us?
Yeah.
Hovering? You know, tell him anything about Noah or school or anything else?
This ain't
Yeah.
this cane.
Yeah, you lost some teeth, didn't you? In the middle of the night.
Now this cane kind of opposites the way, so I don't know.
Yeah, you still need to lose that one, don't you? Since you got a tooth in there coming up behind it. Is Noah letting Mommy and Daddy sleep at all?
No.
No. He's teething and he's snotting and he won't sleep.
Yeah.
So is Mommy and Daddy tired?
Yeah.
Yeah. Are you going a little crazy?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now you want to say bye?
Bye.
Alright. Say bye, Noah. Love you guys. Alright. Welcome back, everyone. You see we had an additional guest today as he's awake and not napping right now. We're going to do chapter 8. This one's probably going to be really, really short because it's a really more of a summarized look at where David is. One thing that I've read in a couple studies as I was looking at this chapter was that this chapter actually likely is written from a viewpoint that is actually from the future. So, in other words, the events that we hear about here, all the various conquests that we're going to get ready to read about, that those conquests actually happened after some of these subsequent chapters that we're going to read. So I think that's something important to remember, that this may actually be a chapter that from a timing standpoint might be out of context with that these chapters may not be written in chronological order. So that's something to remember. And like I said, that's just one devotional I've read that on, but it's something I wanted to note. But it's a short chapter, and we'll go ahead and read it now. This is starting in chapter 8, or at the beginning of chapter 8. In the course of time, David defeated the Philistines and subdued them, and he took Metheg-Ammah from the control of the Philistines. David also defeated the Moabites. He made them lie down on the ground and measured them off with a length of cord. Every 2 lengths of them were put to death, and the third length was allowed to live. So the Moabites became subject to David and brought him tribute. Moreover, David defeated Hadadezer, son of Rehob, king of Zobah, when he went to restore his monument at the Euphrates River. David captured 1,000 of his chariots, 7,000 charioteers, and 20,000 foot soldiers. He hamstrung all but 100 of the chariot horses. When the Arameans of Damascus came to help Hadadezer, king of Zobah, David struck down 22,000 of them. He put garrisons in the Aramean kingdom of Damascus, and the Arameans became subject to him and brought tribute. The Lord gave David victory wherever he went. David took the gold shields that belonged to the officers of Hadadezer and brought them to Jerusalem. From Teba and Berothai, towns that belonged to Hadadezer, King David took a great quantity of bronze. When Tou, king of Hamath, heard that David had defeated the entire army of Hadadezer, he sent his son Joram, to King David, to greet him and congratulate him on his victory in battle over Hadadezer, who had been at war with Tou. Joram brought with him articles of silver, of gold, and of bronze. King David dedicated these articles to the Lord, as he had done with the silver and gold from all the nations he had subdued: Edom and Moab, the Ammonites and the Philistines, and Amalek. He also dedicated the plunder taken from Hadadezer, son of Rehob, king of Zobah. And David became famous after he returned from striking down 18,000 Edomites in the Valley of Salt. He put garrisons throughout Edom, and all the Edomites became subject to David. The Lord gave David victory wherever he went. David reigned over all Israel, doing what was just and right for all his people. Joab, son of Zeruiah, was over the army. Jehoshaphat, son of Ahilud, was recorder. Zadok, son of Ahitub, and Ahimelech, son of Abiathar, were priests. Sariah was secretary. Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, was over the Kerethites and Pelethites, and David's sons were priests. So this is, like I said, a very much a summary chapter. And what we see here is, as David is established in his kingdom, he's not only settled in here, but he's conquered substantially. And so we know from previous chapters that he's conquered. Oops, the cat's trying to get out of the room. We know that he's already conquered Jerusalem. He's kind of made that his capital. We know that he has now started. He's continually fought with the Philistines. He's had victory over the Philistines multiple times. But what we see here is he defeats and subdues them, and it looks like he actually takes land. He takes some of the cities in control. We see he destroys the Moabites and actually takes out all but a third of them. and makes them subject to him, make them bring tribute. So now they're under his control. He defeats Zobah and destroys all but 100 of the chariot horses in that group. And then the Arameans, he struck down 22,000 of them, and he put garrisons, which means that now they're part of his territory. So we see that his empire, and that's what I'm going to call it now, because this type of move looks more imperialistic than just a pure kingdom. He's expanding his land. He's expanding his holding substantially. So God's, not only established his kingdom within the borders that it was, but now it's expanding, and he continues to have success. Now, to his credit, he continues to give God credit for all of that, as we see that he dedicates all the gold and the silver and the plunder. He dedicates them to God when he's conquered. And then we see in chapter 13 the sort of the fulfillment of the prophecy from the last chapter that says, and David became famous after he returned from striking down the 18,000 Edomites. That he is famous now. He is a great conqueror of this area, and he's most likely at this point in time in the Middle East, he's most likely the most dominant force in the Middle East. And so we just know that at this point in time, he is probably the biggest conqueror in this area. He is the king over most of the land in that area. And so we're left with what appears to be, in the last couple chapters, what appears to be everything turning up David. David is winning everything that he needs to. He has become king. He defeats Jerusalem. He establishes his kingdom. God reinforces the fact that his kingdom will be established forever under his line. And now we see that he has expanded and secured his borders beyond what it was. Everything's looking up. And what we know is that, as I think I've said the last couple chapters, and this is a continuing theme, is it would feel like maybe we should just end right here and say they all live happily ever after, and there's no issues and everything was great. Unfortunately, that's not going to be the case, and we're going to start seeing almost immediately after this chapter, we start to see some troubles. And I want to note where the troubles belong. He had countries all the time. He had external forces that were against him, but he was able to defeat them, and he was able to conquer them. The areas where he had the most trouble conquering, the areas that caused him the most grief during his kingdom, were always internal. And in fact, I'm going to expand that to say, with most conquering empires or most expanding kingdoms or countries or nations, as they keep expanding, the things that bring their downfall are generally internal, not external. There's rot in the core. If you look at the Roman Empire, granted, eventually a group was able to conquer Rome, but they were only able to because within the system itself there was too much corruption for it to last. If you look at every empire, every kingdom, their rise and their fall, the rise is almost always through a small effective leader expanding the territory. And then the conquest or the fall is almost always because of some internal struggle, internal rot, internal corruption. Alexander the Great is probably one of the best examples of this. If you think about what he did in a very short lifetime, because he was a young man when he died, he destroyed the Persian Empire, and conquered all the way from Macedonia almost to India. Just think about that. If you've never looked at a map of what Alexander the Great's conquests are, go look on the internet, and then look at in what short of time he did it in. It was unbelievable. The problem was he died, and he had no clear successor, and so his generals and the people under him split the empire that he had built up, and then they started fighting amongst each other. Again, internal strife before external. And what we're going to see here in the next chapter is we're going to start to see in the next couple chapters, we're going to see the internal strife of the kingdom start to cause trouble. And that's where the struggles really begin. And I've been saying this during this devotional. I've been saying this more from a nation state, empire building, kingdom expansion standpoint, but this expands to society. This expands to each one of our individual selves. In the end, I've listened to a lot of sermons from a lot of people that talk about the um, evil influences or the corrupt influences of our society, of our outward society. And generally, I've always seen that a lot of times that sort of comes maybe with a call to insulate ourselves from the outer part of society. But in the end, most of the time when I see people fall, it's not the external influence that get them. It's the internal corruption. It's the internal rot that is what gets them. Each one of us, unfortunately, has a natural ability to sin. It's almost just ingrained into our code. And even if we had no external influences to sin, we would likely fall into those temptations, into those issues. We are just imperfect beings, and just our internal desires, temptations, lusts, wants generally corrupt us quite easily. In the end, external influences can try and change our mindset, but in the end, we're the one that make the decision, and that's internal. And so as we look at this chapter, and like I said, I think this is short because, like I said, I'm sort of pivoting and getting ready for us to go into a whole new part of Second Samuel. But as we look at this, I think what we need to remember is despite whatever the outside influences are, and again, we should be careful of what external influences we allow on ourselves. We should make sure that we have good, upright friends. We should make sure that we moderate ourselves in the world. But in the end, what we really need to control is we need to work on our own willpower. We need to work on our own control. We need to work on our own routines, making sure we stay, close to God and close to Him, and help Him to settle in our influence. If you think about when we talk about Jesus, and I think this is where I'm going to end it because I think this is just the point. We don't ask Jesus to shield us almost like a shield from Star Trek, right? When we want Jesus, what do we say? We want When I was a kid, I remember they always said, "You ask Jesus into your heart, ask Jesus into your soul." The heart and the soul is something internal, and the reason that we ask Him in that way is because what we need is someone to cleanse the inside, our internal being. We're not asking for Jesus to shield us. We're not asking for Jesus to take away all the external temptations, because that's sort of like screaming at the ocean and telling the tide not to come in, that the waves to come in. It's just not going to happen. There's always going to be those external influences that could corrupt us. But we ask for Jesus into our heart because He can help us with the inside struggles that we have on a day-to-day basis, which is why we ask Him into our hearts, not our skins, not our outer being, not our external like a shield. We ask Him into our hearts to help us from the influence. You always kind of wonder between, what we see is some of the influences we see here that David's going to fight over is he's going to fight over lust. He's going to have a son that fights over lust almost soon thereafter. If we look at Solomon, he struggles with lust. He struggles with opulence. He struggles with a lot of these different things. Those are all internal desires within ourselves. And I dare wonder if they would have been better at girding themselves from that. Would the kingdom eventually have been split? Would the kingdom have stayed whole, versus being split into two different kingdoms? Would they have been conquered at different points in time? Likely not. And then also, if we would have looked at Saul, if Saul wouldn't have got himself so fixated on David, who he considered an internal enemy, not an external enemy, an internal enemy, would he have been more prepared when he fought the Philistines? Would he have had David as on his side as an ally to help fight against the Philistines in that last battle that eventually killed Saul? He probably would have. But instead, what we see is in every case, in the case of Saul, in his fight with David, in the case of David, with fights with his own internal sons, and his own internal lusts and desires, what we see is when we falter here, it weakens the overall kingdom. And in the same way, with when we heed our own internal desires that are sinful, we make it easier for the external influences to conquer us. And so, again, as we leave, that's why we need Jesus in our soul. That's why we need to be close to Him. That's why we need to be in the Word. We need to be with other people in church, is because we need to gird ourselves. Because the weakness, the sin, the wrong's going to come from inside, not from outside. And we need to remember that and just ask Jesus to hold us close and to keep us, to help keep us away from those internal desires. Let's pray. Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for a really nice week of weather. Thank you for all the blessings you've given us. That we are in an age where, while there's a lot of external influences, we can also spread your word in a way that is unprecedented in any other time in history. We can get on social media, we can get in YouTube, we can get on so many different platforms, and we can speak about you and broadcast your name in a way that is unprecedented before even a couple years ago. And thank you for letting us have that ability, and let us capitalize on that and do our best to use these tools in the best way. In the same way, there's always external threats that come from that, but there's also more importantly, there's always internal struggles that we all struggle with. And what we see here is we see, as great as David was as conquering enemies, we see that he really struggled with internal conflicts throughout his kingdom, in internal conflicts within his own soul and within his own family. Help us to heed and not be distracted by the external threats that may come, but help us to be mindful and heed the internal issues that we may be fighting, the internal demons, the things that want us to sin, want us to be corrupt, want us to be dishonest, want us to do the wrong thing. Help us to be mindful of those, heed those, and correct ourselves, and help us to remember that you want to purify us, and help us to just keep you close and keep you on our soul to help fight these influences. Please be with all the teachers, the first responders, the students as we go throughout this next week. We're still fighting so many things in our world that can be dangerous, and just help us to be kind. One of the best ways for us to fight these issues is to work together and be kind to each other, and help us to be kind and compassionate and empathetic. And we ask for all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, thank you everybody for going through that. Like I said, that was another little bit of a short one. By way of announcements, we always have church service at Sunday 10:45. You can always come and stop in. We are still doing in-person church. We are also still doing virtual church. So if you don't feel comfortable because of COVID or for some other reason, or if you just can't get there, or if you're too far away, but you want to hear kind of what we're talking about, Pastor Scott and Pastor Earl give great sermons. I highly suggest you watch them virtual. They're always, where they are live, they are always later on recorded. So if you have another church but you want another message throughout the week, something that I do a lot of times with various churches, you can always go on an A Point during the week and find it on YouTube, find it on Facebook. We're on several different ways. We'll be back here again next week at 6 o'clock. We'll be going through chapter 8 or chapter 9. And we're really going to start to pivot and talk about some of the internal issues that we see David has. So have a great evening. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you, guys.